Hello everyone, how's it going? And welcome to my tier list for Wild Rift patch 5.0a. We've been about over a week now since the patch has come out. I've played quite a few games on the patch as well. I also haven't updated my tier lists or done a video on my tier list since the hotfix buffs back in 5.0 as well. Things like Aurelian Soul getting a hotfix buff, items like Heartsteel, Titanic Hydra, Spirit Shogun. The last time I did a tier list, these three items got buffed twice, which is absolutely insane if you really think about it. All the new items coming into the Rift, everyone thought they were really strong. They even got buffed even more, and I think they're pretty good items now. Obviously, we'll go through all of that with the tiers. We'll go through every single role, and I'll give you a bit of an update on what I think on some of the champions. And as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more Wild Rift content. Right, let's get straight into this. Timestamps in the description if you want to skip to any of the roles. But as always, we're going to start off with the Baron lane. Not really too much has changed with the Baron lane. I think Baron lane is in quite an interesting spot because I think there are a lot of champions that work incredibly well with the new Heartsteel item. Champions like Dr. Mundo, Sion, Ornn, even Shen as well. If you really want to, Shen can work quite well with Heartsteel. I'm not too sure if they're still good enough to be in the S+ tier though. I did move Ornn up into the S+ tier because I think this champion is one of the best champions that works well with Heartsteel, and probably one of the champions that not a lot of people were playing. You know, everyone was hyping up Sion, Dr. Mundo with Heartsteel plus the Titanic Hydra, but people kind of forgot about Ornn with Heartsteel. Ornn is an incredible champion with Heartsteel, and not only that, you can build items wherever you want to on the map. So you can just build Heartsteel when you're already in laning phase, get that stacking early, and then you can build other items to deal damage instead. Obviously, you're not going to build Titanic Hydra, but you can build other items like Searing Crown, Thornmail, Twin Guard, you know, all these tank items. And he already does a lot of damage. He offers a lot of crowd control in team fights. And that's why, for me, he's moved back up into the S+ tier. He was put down into the S tier after some nerfs. I think it was about a month ago now. He received quite a few nerfs, so I moved him down, but I feel like he definitely deserves to move back up there. He does pretty well in like these tank versus tank matchups as well. But the Dr. Mundo and Sion still sit in the S tier. I still think these champions could move up into S+ tier. I think both these champions work so well with Titanic Hydra and also Heartsteel. Also Set as well. I forgot to mention Set is also another champion that works well with Heartsteel and Titanic Hydra. One big thing though about these two items is I would only run Titanic Hydra and Heartsteel on champions that go for the resolve tree, mainly because of Overgrowth and because of Grasp Beyond Undying. Grasp Beyond Undying gives you bonus health. Overgrowth also gives you bonus health, and it just gives you more damage for Heartsteel and also more damage towards Titanic Hydra. I think for champions that I've seen people go, you know, for Titanic Hydra on champions like Camille, Jax, you know, other champions, even Aatrox, I've seen Titanic Hydra. I don't think it works too well because you don't really go for the resolve tree. You don't really go for Overgrowth on these champions. So you're not getting the most amount of potential out of Titanic Hydra. But again, I still think these champions in the S+ tier are definitely by far the strongest. You know, Jax, Fiora with the split pushing, and also Camille as well, incredibly strong. Especially Jax now with Spirit Shogun. That's another topic as well. You know, Spirit Shogun for champions like Jax, champions like Renekton as well works incredibly well. Aatrox is up there. Riven, which is a little bit down on the Baron lane, but has moved up in the jungle. There are so many things that have really changed in the Baron lane that have kind of shifted things around ever so slightly. Again, it's really hard to kind of knock them champions off the S+ tier, in my opinion. All the champions in the S+ tier are just incredibly strong. However, I do feel like all the S tier champions are definitely viable as well. I don't think you should look at this tier list and say like, oh, okay, I should play any champion in the S+ tier and then ignore the champions in the S tier. No, I think you should definitely go for these champions in the S tier as well. I think when you start moving down towards the A, B, and even the C tier, I think this is when you start to get champions that are either a little bit more difficult to play, don't really offer too much, or can't really carry as much as some of the other champions. So yeah, S+ tier and S tier kind of stay the same. Bit of movement here and there. Garen also received a bit of a buff as well, which is quite nice. So Garen still stays up there in the S tier. As for the other tiers, you got champions like Kennen, Teemo. Teemo could be okay. I think you can work quite well in range versus melee matchups. Irelia and Riven, bit more difficult to play. I think these champions do have potential, but they're a bit more on the difficult side to try and master. Wukong not really that strong at the moment in the Baron lane. Kind of struggles a bit against these tanks and also against the other bruisers. Malphite as well doesn't really work too well with Heartsteel, doesn't work too well with Titanic Hydra, and it's kind of falling off the meta a little bit in terms of playing him as a tank. A lot of people playing him full AP now, so that's very interesting. Then you have Trendemir, Olaf, Pantheon, Volibear, and Urgot. These champions are not really too great. Same with Kayle, Nasus, and Singed as well. Again, champions that don't really feel like they can really do too much. I think all these champions in the bottom tier are very, very difficult. But I think other than that, I think this tier list looks pretty accurate in my opinion. Some people could say that like maybe some champions in like S+ tier and S tier can maybe move around depending on players' opinions and people's opinions on some champions and how the matchups go. Obviously, matchups are so dependent and builds are very dependent as well. But it's nice to see that there's a bit of variety in Baron lane now. We're not seeing bruisers go wild in the Baron lane. It's nice to see some tanks come into this, you know, like Dr. Mundo, Sion, Set now building as a tank, Shen as well, because of Heartsteel and because of Titanic Hydra. So overall, I think Baron lane is sitting in a pretty healthy spot. I would say there's quite a lot of champions and quite a lot of variety in the Baron lane. As for the jungle, the 4 champions stay the same in the S+ tier. I've moved 1 champion back up into the S+ tier. Hecarim is, I don't know how to feel about this champion, because Hecarim is just so disgusting. Like, there are so many times I'm playing as an AD carry and I cannot kill Hecarim. I build anti-heal, I build early Executioner's Calling, I build as much damage as possible. This champion just does not die. Not only that, does a ton of damage, heals a lot as well, has a ton of movement speed, so it's very, very difficult to try and catch and try and kind of CC in any way. I think this champion is absolutely crazy right now, and I think definitely sits up there in the S+ tier. I don't think that anyone can really say anything different. You know, all the other champions in the S+ tier are pretty much staying the same. Kha'Zix, Evelynn, Shadow Assassin, Kayn, and Lee Sin. No surprises really with all these champions sitting up in the S+ tier. As we move down into the S tier, I've moved some of the champions down into A tier. Again, trying to kind of make sure that I only keep the champions in S+ tier and S tier that I feel like are strong in pretty much every single scenario. As I said, Riven moving back up in the jungle. I think Riven works incredibly well as a jungle now with all of mobility, but also with Spirit Shojin being added, I think works incredibly well with Riven. Also the buffs that Spirit Shojin has received. Some of these other champions can also work decently with Spirit Shojin. Again, Aatrox can work pretty well with Spirit Shojin. Maybe someone like Xin Zhao can also work well with Spirit Shojin. Quite a few champions here work well with Spirit Shojin. But again, a lot of bruisers here. Quite a few carries, you know, Yone sitting up there is pretty decent. Wukong still works decently as a jungler, probably a bit more, bit better than the Baron lane. Also, you have Gragas here, Aatrox, Jace, and then Ross, Kayn as well. Interesting enough that people are starting to go Ross, Kayn, but building as a damage dealer. So you go Ross, Kayn, but you go lethality with like Ghostblade and Edge of Night, and kind of just have Ross Kayn as more of a healing source with your ultimate, and also CC with your second ability. So very interesting. I might change the build for Ross Kayn, but I think I'll keep it as it is for now, because I think as a bruiser, Ross Kayn can still work well. But Shadow Assassin or Ross Kayn, both of these are incredibly good. Shadow Assassin maybe a little bit better. I think Ross Kayn is actually a bit better in this meta. If there are more tanks on the enemy team, then Ross Kayn is definitely going to do better, because you deal more damage depending on the enemy's maximum health. So there are ways in which Ross Kayn can definitely work better. As we move down into the A tier, there's quite a few champions in the A tier now. I don't think I'm going to add back in the A+ tier that I did way before. I think it's fine to have quite a few champions in A tier. These are just champions in general that I kind of hit and miss in general. I don't think these are champions that are really bad, and I don't think these are champions that are also really good at the same time. There are scenarios in which these champions can work incredibly well. Champions like Pantheon, for example, very easy to play. You can one-shot anyone. Nautilus as well, incredible with the crowd control. Morgana with her incredible jungle clear speed, one of the fastest in the game still, can still work pretty well. I just think they're just very difficult compared to the ones above to try and play. I don't think there's really any champions in the A tier looking through it now that I really feel like deserve to be in the S tier. Fizz probably was in the S tier before, but now with the nerfs that happened to Fizz in the most recent patch, I think Fizz moves down a tier. Not as good as what Fizz was beforehand. But again, there are some champions here that you can still play. I still think that some of these champions can still work incredibly well. You know, if you want to play, again, more tanks, you can go for someone like Nunu. Shen can also be pretty decent because you can clear through the jungle and use your ultimate. But just in general, not as great. Then you have B-tier champions, which don't really offer too much. Dr. Mundo jungle is a bit of an interesting one. I think Dr. Mundo jungle is actually doing relatively well in China. Don't really know about what he really like offers as a jungler, really. Maybe it's a bit interesting. Maybe just because Dr. Mundo's on the hype train at the moment and people don't really know how to deal with Dr. Mundo because of the CC immunity he has, because of the incredible tankiness he has, or the healing that he has. Maybe there's just a case of players starting to get used to playing against Dr. Mundo again, because it's been a long time since Dr. Mundo's kind of been in the meta. But again, I don't think you can really use things like Grasping Undying well in the jungle. That's why I've gone for Conqueror. You can't really use Heartsteel that well either, because you can't farm it through minions. You have to auto attack champions, which is a bit difficult because Dr. Mundo doesn't really gank very well. He just throws his cleaver and he just hopes that he hits and he slows an enemy champion. Then you have to walk up and auto attack to proc Heartsteel. So you're not really going to get that many stacks with Heartsteel, so you don't really go for that type of build. Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one. Maybe he can move up one, I'm not too sure. Rammus can still work okay, but not really too great at the moment. I think you have Lilia, Graves, Mumu, Irelia, and then the C tier has also stayed the same as well, with champions like Warwick, Tryndamere, Master Yi, and Shyvana. Again, pretty nice to see that there are quite a few champions in the S plus tier and the S tier that I think are incredibly good. I think the only thing we're kind of lacking at the moment in the jungle is kind of AP damage sources, because Evelynn is incredibly powerful. Everyone knows that. Gragas also pretty decent. Diana can probably still be played in the jungle. Not as good as probably Evelynn and Gragas, but again, can be pretty decent. But other than that, there's not really a lot of AP champions. Obviously, Fizz was quite good before, but since the recent nerf, I don't think is that good anymore. So yeah, it's very dominated by a lot of AD assassins or assassins in general, or just bruisers as well, because they just clear through the jungle so quickly and they're so much more impactful when it comes to them big, massive late game team fights. Mid lane, Syndra buff. I'm very surprised that Syndra got buffed, to be fair. I'm not surprised that they buffed her base health, because I did think that she was very squishy. I'm very surprised that they buffed any of her damage in general, because I think Syndra was an incredibly strong champion. I think that she was really powerful. I think she was very strong. I think she offered a lot of crowd control, a lot of poke damage. Obviously with First Strike as well can also work incredibly well. I'm not too sure what they were thinking with the Syndra buff, but hey, I had her in S plus tier before. Obviously she's going to stay in S plus tier. I think a lot of other players as well are now putting her in the S plus tier because of the most recent buffs, but I think she was pretty strong beforehand. Maybe players were just starting to get used to her, but no surprise that Jace is still up there. Kassadin with the incredible late game scaling and also the mobility, and also Vladimir's up here as well as one of the strongest champions. S tier, as I mentioned, with Aurelion Sol getting the HOTFIX buff in patch 5.0. Obviously I haven't done a tier list since then. He has actually moved up into the S tier. I think Aurelion Sol is incredibly powerful right now. I think he is a bit more on the difficult side. Honestly, if you understand how to play Aurelion Sol, and if you understand how to play around his kit and how to use his abilities properly, then he definitely moves up into the S plus tier. I've only put him in the S tier because he's a bit on the more difficult side to play. You need to collect the Stardust. You need to know when to use your ultimate at the right time, when to use your abilities at the right time, when to keep your distance as well, because you're very immobile when you're channeling your first ability. You do a lot of damage, but you are very vulnerable to any CC or any damage that comes your way. So I think Aurelion Sol in general is just incredibly powerful, really strong, and a hotfix buff definitely, helped him out a lot. Again, before I thought he was like A tier or B tier because he wasn't really that strong, but now he's definitely a lot stronger now. As for other champions in the S tier, no surprise really about any of these champions in the S tier. Irelia obviously works very well mid lane, especially against some of these mages in the mid lane. He can really play aggressive. Same with Yasuo and Yone, also works very well, but mages still do pretty well. Orianna, Ahri, Vex, Zoe as well is still incredibly annoying to deal with, and also Akali in the S tier. Moving on down to A, again, champions that again are kind of hit and miss. I think that's a good way of putting the A tier, that champions are kind of hit and miss in a way. Zyra buff was quite nice. I think that she was one of the worst champions actually, coming out of the patch of 5.0, because that nerf that she had before with her plant health made it very, very difficult for her. And also she just didn't really do a lot of damage. So the buff that she received is quite nice. You'll see that she's kind of stayed or moved up in the support tier list as well. Other champions in mid lane, I think Katarina is pretty decent. A little bit difficult to deal with. A little bit difficult to kind of make work at the moment because of all the tanks that are in the meta and also all the crowd control that's in the meta. So a little bit more difficult to play with. Ziggs buff, I'm not too sure about Ziggs. I think there are a lot of better mages in the mid lane. I actually moved Ziggs down. Even though Ziggs got a buff, I did move him down because I think there are just a lot better champions in the mid lane that you can play. Ziggs is probably more of a dual lane champion, to be fair, than a mid laner. I think that he just gets punished way too much. Like you're super passive. You don't really offer a lot of like playmaking potential. You know, if you think about all these champions, you know, Vex, Ahri, Zoe, Orianna, Aurelion Sol, the other mages have a lot of playmaker potential. Whereas Ziggs is kind of, you stay back, you use your abilities, and that's about it. I think the changes to his passive and also some of his abilities meant that he's a lot weaker now during the early games. You're not that super annoying champion to deal with that you're poking constantly. You're doing a lot of damage. So I think it definitely moves down. Obviously, Fizz moves down as well because of the nerf. Other than that, I think everyone pretty much deserves to be in the A tier. I think Lucian, again, is hit and miss depending on the matchup. Same with Akshan as well. You can play some aggressive champions in the mid lane. Lucian, Akshan, Pyke, I think are very, very good. But other than that, it's a little bit difficult with the A tier. B tier, Kai'Sa's moved down. Corki's moved down. Or Kai'Sa moved down before, actually. I don't think Kai'Sa's that good in the mid lane at all right now. Same with Corki. I think Corki as a champion is just very bad at the moment. Doesn't really offer too much. Karma, again, not too great in the mid lane. Can work okay, but is a bit more of a passive champion. Kennen is an interesting one because I think China have like an incredibly high win rate in the mid lane right now for Kennen. But I think the problem with Kennen is that if you exhaust Kennen, then that's a lot of the damage gone from Kennen. And you know, they won't be able to do too much. Kennen won't be able to do that much when it gets into the team fights. I mean, if you catch people off guard with the ultimate and if they can't react in time, then you could do a lot of burst damage and, you know, pretty much one-shot them. Again, bit of a difficult champion to play, in my opinion. It can work out well. We can do pretty well, but other than that, not really. And then C tier, no surprise here. Morgana, Singe, Bran, and Kayle. Yeah, none of these champions offer anything at all, really. They're not really that great. Dual lane, I found it very difficult in the dual lane to put any champion in the S+ tier. I do not think there is a single champion right now that is dominating in the dual lane, which you could say is a pretty good thing. I would say there is everyone in the S tier right now are incredibly strong for different reasons. You have late game scaling champions like Tristana that does incredibly well. Zeri, obviously late game scaling. Kai'Sa as well. You have the early game aggressive champions like Lucian. It does incredibly well. You have the long range from champions like Caitlyn and also Varus for poke damage during the laning phase. And also Xayah's there as well as a champion that's a bit more on the defensive side. Or you can just play someone like Ezreal again. These two champions are super defensive and just very, very safe to play. I cannot think right now, and I still can't think, you know, when I was going through and updating this tier list, I was thinking to myself, it's like, what champion deserves to be in the S+ tier? And to be honest, I don't think any of them do. I don't think any champion is incredibly powerful and that is stronger than the rest right now, which means that ADC is in, I would say, a pretty good spot. I think they got hurt a little bit with all the Heartsteel and Titanic Hydra because they struggle a little bit against some of the tanks, but I think overall ADC is in a pretty decent spot, and it's very difficult, again, like I said, to try and put anyone in the S+ tier. As we move down into the A tier, it's just champions that are just a little bit weaker or more difficult to play. Draven and Samira, these two champions are very, very powerful, but they're very, very difficult to play. I think Samira is one of the most difficult AD carries to play, so I think that if you master Samira, then she could definitely move up into S tier, but for now I'll keep her in the A tier. Jinx and Vayne, I think Jinx just needs an enchanter. You know, if you don't play Jinx Lulu or Jinx Nami, then Jinx becomes pretty useless. You need some sort of defensive mechanic or shielding, healing, or anything to kind of protect Jinx, because if you don't, then she struggles. Vayne, again, just takes too long to come online. She does pretty well against tanks because of her true damage, but that's about it. But she takes way too long to come online, and also she just is terrible during the laning phase, and she just loses every single laning phase, you kind of lose tempo off of that. Again, Draven is pretty good, you know, early game champion. Miss Fortune's still pretty decent. I don't know what the best build on her is really. I see people go lethality. I see people go crit. I think it's a mix of the two, but it's pretty decent champion. Jin as well, pretty decent. Doesn't have the greatest of damage outputs. And then you have Twitch, who obviously received the nerf in the most recent patch. I think it was all to do with China, because China was spamming Twitch AD carry and also doing pretty well. I saw no Twitch AD carry at all in EU since recent nerf, or even before the recent nerf, sorry. I saw no Twitch AD carry, so I'm not too sure if that was a low elo thing, or, you know, Twitch is just performing well in general. So again, I don't think Twitch is that good. Corki's not that great. Neela is just very difficult to play again. Again, really struggles during laning phase. Ashe, again, more of a utility champion than a carry. That's why she's a bit lower on the tier list. And then we move on to support. I don't think much has changed with support. Looking at this now, I don't think anything has really changed at all. We didn't really get too many changes. I think one big thing. Now, you might be surprised that Yuumi is down here. This is going to be post-nerf. Is that the right way of saying it? Yeah. Like after nerf Yuumi. So Yuumi hasn't been nerfed yet, or reworked, as you want to say. She's been reworked February 14th, if I'm not mistaken. It was in the patch notes. I think Yuumi's being reworked February 14th, which is making Yuumi easier to play, but making her a lot weaker. And I honestly think that Yuumi might be really, really bad after the rework. We'll have to see. Maybe I'm just kind of over exaggerating a little bit. Maybe the extra damage and the healing is still going to be incredibly strong, but the healing is not that good anymore because it got nerfed a few months ago. The second ability is now not going to scale as much with the attack damage or the ability power that the ally has that you're sitting on. The first ability doesn't really do too much anymore, and you can't really spam it as much because you don't get mana from the passive. And also the passive now has an 18-second cooldown at every single rank. So early game, you're never going to be getting the shield. And like, I don't think the champion is going to be that good at all. I think the champion can still be countered quite a lot as well. You know, you play champions like Nautilus, Alistar, Thresh, Pyke. You play any of these crowd control champions, you just jump on. You're basically playing 2 versus 1 in the lane. You jump on the AD carry. If the new Yuumi jumps out, you focus Yuumi, you CC her. She can't jump back in, and then she's pretty much dead. So I honestly think that Yuumi is not going to be as great after the nerfs. We'll have to see, or after the rework, I should say. I keep forgetting to call it rework. But yeah, very, very interesting. I'm not too sure what to think about it, but yeah, we'll see. As for the other champions, you know, S+ tier pretty much stays the same. Soraka, incredibly powerful with her healing and also her silence. Pyke is one of the best carries with Lux as well. Really, really good. S tier, again, champions that kind of depending on what you want to play. If you want to play a tank, you can play any of the tanks that are really, really good, or you can play different enchanters that also work really well. Ornn is a champion that I might actually move up. I think Ornn is one of the most underrated supports. I think the CC that he offers and everything you can deal, everything that you can deal with as an Ornn is really, really good. So maybe I might move Ornn up. Obviously, Zyra's here as well after the buff. And then you have champions like Swain, Seraphine, Ashe, Blitzcrank, and Set, and also Morgana. People are talking to me a lot about Morgana, saying I underrate her. She just doesn't really do anything. She doesn't really counter CC champions either, because, well, the Morganas that I've played with or played against, they don't know how to use the Black Shield. They use the Black Shield on themselves and they don't know how to use it. And even then, I don't think the Black Shield is enough to be more of a counter to champions like Thresh and Alistar and Nautilus, because all you have to do is just wait for the Black Shield to expire and then you engage afterwards. And Morgana doesn't really offer anything at all. You just put your pull down during the laning phase. In team fights, you don't really have enough gold to be more of a carry anyway. You can't really protect your AD carry unless you maybe bind someone. But again, that's a bit difficult. So yeah, that's why I think that Morgana is one of the worst supports right now. But yeah, that's pretty much everything for the tier list. Again, not really too many changes. We had the hotfix buff with patch 5.0. And also we had the changes in 5.0a. So a few things to go to, and a few things have moved around, but nothing too crazy in terms of the tier list. I would love to get all your guys' opinions, actually, guys and girls' opinions on the AD carry, because I cannot think right now of a champion that deserves to be in the S+ tier. But hey, if you think of a champion that deserves to be in S+ tier in the dual lane, let me know down in the comments. As always, thank you for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.